After 20 years, we're letting you go. Clean out your desk by Friday." The words landed like a gavel, sharp and final in the sterile glass-walled conference room. Richard Hale didn't even look up from the folder in his hands when he said it. Clara from HR slid the packet across the table. Severance benefits legal jargon that read like a cold obituary of my career. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I just smiled, closed the folder, and said, "No problem." What Richard didn't know was that I had been waiting for this moment, preparing for it. The silence after my words stretched uncomfortable and raw. Richard's jaw twitched. He expected outrage, maybe tears. At the very least, a stammering protest. I had given this company 20 years of my life, 20 years of late nights, missed holidays, and quiet sacrifices that stacked up like unpaid invoices. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and crossed one leg over the other, meeting his eyes with a calmness that unnerved him. Evelyn Clara started, her voice tinged with rehearsed sympathy. "We know this is a shock, but restructuring means we have to save it." I cut in, not unkindly. "I've heard the speech before. Everyone has." Her lips pressed into a thin line. Richard finally looked up, and his gray eyes carried that smug corporate detachment I'd come to despise. "It's not personal. It's business. You understand?" Business. The word echoed in my mind like a bitter punchline. I gathered the folder and tapped its edges against the table, neat and orderly. "Friday, then." "Yes. Clear out your desk by close of business," he replied. His tone clipped, already moving on to the next item in his mental agenda. To him, I was a line item checked off. I stood smoothing the lapel of my blazer. "No problem." And I meant it. Walking back through the office, I felt eyes on me. My team Daniel, hunched over his workstation, Priya, with her hair pulled back in a messy bun, Marcus fiddling with the prototype design, Helena carefully updating data sheets. They looked up briefly, then quickly away their faces, wearing the kind of sympathy that stings more than cruelty. The rumor would spread in minutes. Evelyn Ross, 20 years in, had been let go. I passed the framed awards on the wall. Most of them bore Richard's name, though I had been the architect behind those innovations. He was a master at smiling for cameras, while I stayed behind sleeves rolled, perfecting every detail. 20 years ago, when I first walked into this company, I was naive, hungry to prove myself. I believed in loyalty, in the idea that hard work would be rewarded. Back then, Richard had been a rising star, charming the board, making promises of industry disruption. I thought I was joining a revolution. Instead, I built the machine that chewed me up. At my office, I closed the door and let the quiet settle in. My desk was still cluttered with draft sketches and notes that looked meaningless to anyone else. But I knew better. Every scrap of paper, every design iteration was part of a story I had been writing quietly in shadows, where Richard's gaze never lingered. I slipped the severance folder into a drawer, then pulled out my own folder, sleek black, unassuming. Inside were documents, contracts, and patents Richard didn't even know existed. He thought he had stripped me of power. But the truth was that power had shifted months ago, the moment I realized what he was planning. I'd seen the way he avoided eye contact in board meetings when the subject of restructuring came up. The whispers in hallways, the subtle exclusion from future planning sessions. I wasn't stupid, so I had prepared. The rest of Friday was theater. HR walking me through benefits as though dangling scraps would soften the blow. Colleagues offering platitudes. "You'll land on your feet, Evelyn," or "It's just corporate life. You know how it is." Yes, I knew exactly how it was. At 5 o'clock, I closed my office door for the last time, slid the black folder into my leather bag, and walked toward the elevator. The hallway buzzed with the weekend exodus employees eager to forget work over happy hour. I stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut, sealing me in a mirrored box. My reflection stared back, a woman of 55 lines, etched by late nights and long battles, but eyes sharp, unyielding. Richard Hale thought he had ended my story. But really, he had just given me the perfect opening line. The weekend stretched before me like a loaded spring. Most people in my position would have spent those 2 days grieving, drowning their sorrows in wine or self-pity. I did neither. Instead, I woke early Saturday morning, brewed a pot of black coffee, and spread my folders across the oak dining table like maps before a general plotting war. The sunlight bled through my curtains, warm on my face, but my mind was cold precise. Every sheet of paper carried weight. Designs I'd sketched years ago, contracts buried in email threads Richard never bothered to read, draft patents tucked into my personal files. 20 years had given me not just a career, it had given me an archive. And Richard had been arrogant enough to think I would walk away empty-handed. I ran my fingers across the oldest blueprint. I could still remember the night it was born. 3 a.m, fluorescent lights buzzing, a lukewarm sandwich half-eaten on my desk. Richard had been asleep in his penthouse, but I had been here chasing an idea that would change the industry. I didn't mind then. I thought we were building something together. But now, as I traced the ink, I saw the truth. I had been building his empire while he sharpened the knife for my back. I stood stretched and walked to the window. Outside, the city pulsed with weekend life, couples on morning runs, delivery trucks groaning down the street, the low hum of traffic. All of it seemed distant. My world was here in these documents, in this secret arsenal. I thought of my team: Daniel, Priya, Marcus, Helena. Brilliant minds, loyal hearts, each one undervalued and overworked. Richard would let them go too sooner or later because that's what he did. He gutted people like houses, selling the bricks for quick profit. But maybe I could offer them something better. The thought grew like a spark catching dry tinder. I pulled out my laptop, opened a folder labeled innocuously as house receipts, and keyed in the password. Instantly, my private database came alive. Designs, market analysis, confidential notes, even recordings of Richard contradicting himself in meetings. I had built this library quietly over the years, not because I anticipated revenge, but because I had always believed in keeping receipts. Scrolling through, one document stopped me cold. A contract draft from 5 years ago, hidden under layers of legal jargon. I remembered the meeting, Richard swearing it was just internal paperwork, no signatures required. But there it was. My name listed as co-creator on the original patent filing for our flagship technology. The same technology that had made the company billions. Richard had buried it, filed the official patent under his name alone, cutting me out completely. I leaned back in my chair, the bitterness sharp, almost metallic in my mouth. 20 years of loyalty, and this was how he rewarded me. By stealing not just my time, but my ideas. But now I had proof. The phone buzzed on the table, a text from Priya. "Evelyn, is it true? Did they let you go?" I stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to lie, to tell her it was just gossip. But I typed back honestly. "Yes, Friday was my last day." The 3 dots blinked, disappeared, then blinked again. Finally, her reply came. "I'm so sorry. It's not fair. None of this is fair." I smiled faintly. Not fair was an understatement. Another buzz, Daniel this time. "He's a fool. We all know you carried the department. If you ever start something new, I'm in." I froze reading that line again. If you ever start something new, I'm in. The spark became a flame. By Sunday afternoon, my dining table looked like a war room. Notes, timelines, lists of contacts sprawled everywhere. I had circled one name again and again: Michael Tran, CEO of Vortex Dynamics, Richard's fiercest competitor. Michael was everything. Richard wasn't innovative, ruthless, in a way that demanded respect, but known for rewarding loyalty. We'd crossed paths at conferences, shared polite small talk, once even debated design ethics over 2 strong coffee. He had admired my work, I could tell. If anyone would understand the value of what I carried, it would be him. But going to Michael wasn't just business. It was declaration of war. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared at my reflection in the window. My own eyes looked back at me, clear, steady. Was I really ready to burn 20 years to the ground? The answer came without hesitation. Yes. That night, I drafted an email, polite professional but laced with quiet confidence. Michael, I believe we have much to discuss. Let's meet Monday morning. I'll bring something you'll want to see. I hovered over the send button for a long moment, my finger trembling slightly. One click could change everything. Finally, I pressed it. The whoosh of the email leaving my outbox sounded like the crack of a match. Monday was coming, and with it, the fire Richard Hale never saw coming. Monday loomed like a storm on the horizon. The city didn't know, Richard didn't know, but I did. Today was the day the ground would shift. I woke before dawn, slipping into my navy blazer and pressed slacks like armor. I pinned my silver hair back, applied lipstick the shade of iron, and studied myself in the mirror. Calm, collected, dangerous. On the table sat a leather folder, sleek and heavy. Inside were the blueprints, the hidden contract draft, and a condensed presentation I had worked on all night. Every page whispered power. I slid the folder into my bag and whispered to my reflection, "No problem." The subway rattled beneath the city, its fluorescent lights casting tired faces in pale yellow. I sat quietly among them, one hand resting on my bag, the other wrapped around a paper cup of coffee. The world above was just waking up bakers, pulling bread from ovens, delivery trucks, unloading crates. No one suspected that inside this crowded train, one woman carried the future of an entire industry on her lap. At every stop, my chest tightened. Not from fear, but anticipation. Years of silence and compromise had led me here. Every insult Richard had smirked through, every idea he had stolen, every dismissal from his glass-walled office had carved this path. Today the ledger would balance. I arrived 10 minutes early at Vortex Tower. The building shimmered against the morning sky, all steel and glass reflecting sunlight like a blade. Inside the lobby, buzzed with motion assistants, with lattes, executives with phone calls pressed against their ears, security guards watching everything. I approached the reception desk. "Evelyn Ross," I said smoothly. "I have an appointment with Mr. Tran." The receptionist's eyes flicked to her screen, then back to me. "Yes, Ms. Ross. He's expecting you." Her words carried weight. Expecting me. Not just a meeting squeezed between calls. He had cleared his calendar. The elevator ride was silent except for the faint hum of machinery. As the numbers climbed, my pulse beat in rhythm with the lights. When the doors opened, I stepped into a world of polished wood, abstract art, and power, humming in the air like static. Michael Tran's office door stood open. He was already standing, hands in his pockets, sharp in a tailored charcoal suit. His smile was slight, but his eyes sharp. Curious followed me as I entered. "Evelyn Ross," he said, voice smooth as velvet. "I wondered how long it would take before you knocked on my door." I couldn't help the faint smile tugging at my lips. "I prefer to arrive when the timing is appropriate." "Then today must be very appropriate." He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. I sat, placing my bag beside me, the leather folder just visible. Michael leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "I heard about your departure. Hale is predictable. He never did know how to value people." "He values them until he doesn't," I said evenly. Michael chuckled low and knowing. "So, you came here instead of retreating. That tells me two things. One, you're not finished. Two, you have something Hale doesn't want me to see." I met his gaze squarely. "You're perceptive." He nodded at the folder. "Show me." With steady hands, I drew it out, opening the cover slowly, deliberately. First, the patent draft with my name scrawled across the co-creator line. His eyes narrowed, his hand lifting the page as though it were a relic. "Good God," he murmured. Next, the blueprints refinements Richard had shelved, claiming they were too ambitious. Michael's eyes moved swiftly, scanning every curve, every annotation. Finally, I slid the smaller set of documents across. "This," I said softly, "is a roadmap. Everything Richard will try to launch over the next 2 years. But I can tell you now, half of it is smoke, the other half is stolen." Michael sat back silent for a long moment. The hum of the city below filled the room. Finally, He exhaled a sound of wonder and calculation. "You've been sitting on this for years." I didn't blink. I was building it for him. He made the mistake of thinking it belonged to him. He smiled, then not warm, but fierce. "And now?" "Now," I said, my voice calm as water, "I want to build something of my own. With the right partner, with the right team, and with the receipts to bury him if he tries to stop us." Michael leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He studied me as though weighing every word. Then slowly, he nodded. "You've got steel, Evelyn Ross. And leverage. Two things I respect." I allowed myself a measured breath. "Then we have an understanding." His grin widened just slightly. By the time Hale walks into his office Monday morning, he won't recognize the battlefield. When I left Vortex Tower, the air outside felt electric. The city roared around me, horns blaring, footsteps rushing, but all I heard was the steady drum of victory building in the distance. I pulled out my phone and sent a single message to Daniel. "Clear your evening. Big things ahead." As I slipped the phone back into my pocket, a sense of clarity washed over me. The pieces were moving, quietly, precisely. And Richard Hale had no idea he'd already lost. Richard Hale strolled into the office Monday morning with the smug satisfaction of a man convinced the world revolved around him. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the marble floor, his expensive cologne wafted through the air, and his laughter, loud forced grating, preceded him down the hall. I watched from my cubicle, head lowered, a neutral smile on my lips. To anyone else, I looked like a woman quietly boxing up the last of her personal belongings. To Richard, I was invisible, now already erased. But invisibility was power, and power, I had learned, was best used in silence until the perfect moment. At 10 o'clock, sharp, the executive boardroom filled. Richard, of course, stood at the head of the table. His gray suit gleamed under the recessed lighting, his Rolex caught every flicker. He was in full performance mode. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming. "This quarter, we are on the cusp of something extraordinary. Thanks to our relentless drive and my team's dedication, Vortex Dynamics will lead the industry in the new AI systems rollout. Competitors won't know what hit them." The board nodded dutifully, scribbling notes, sipping coffee. No one dared interrupt him. That was Richard's favorite illusion, that he commanded both fear and loyalty. I sat quietly at the far end, my leather folder resting against my lap, pulse steady. Then the interruption came. The boardroom door swung open. Michael Tran stepped inside, flanked by his assistant, carrying a slim laptop bag. His presence was a thunderclap. Calm, inevitable, impossible to ignore. Richard's smile faltered. "Michael," he said tightly, "I wasn't aware you'd be joining us." Michael's voice was smooth, polite, but edged like a blade. "I wasn't aware either, Richard, until Ms. Ross invited me." Every head turned. A ripple of whispers stirred the air. Richard's face drained, then flushed crimson. His gaze snapped to me, fire sparking in his eyes. "Evelyn," he hissed, "what the hell is this?" I met his glare without flinching. A reality check. Michael set his laptop on the table, his assistant sliding into place beside him. He projected a series of slides onto the massive wall screen, patents, blueprints, contract drafts. My work, my name in the fine print. Gasps circled the room like wind through trees. Richard barked, "This is stolen material. This is corporate sabotage." Michael's calm smile never wavered. "On the contrary, the only sabotage I see is here." He clicked to the next slide, evidence of duplicate projects, competitor data siphoned into Vortex systems, and my personal notes lifted without credit. "Mr. Hale, it seems you've built your empire on someone else's labor." The room stilled. Board members stared at Richard, shock and suspicion flickering across their faces. Richard turned to me, spittle forming at the corner of his mouth. "You think you can do this to me? After everything, after I gave you 20 years. You didn't give me anything," I cut in, my voice sharp but calm. "You took. You took my time, my work, my innovations. You paraded them as your own. And now, Richard, I'm taking back what's mine." His fists clenched. For a moment, I thought he'd lunge across the table. But the board members were watching, whispering their confidence in him, cracking like glass under pressure. Michael leaned back in his chair. "Let's not waste time. Here's what's going to happen. Ms. Ross and I are forming a new venture. Several of you have already expressed frustration with Hale's leadership style. Consider this an invitation to shift your loyalty." His assistant clicked, and suddenly charts filled the screen. Financial forecasts, strategic plans, growth projections. All built from my stolen ideas, but reimagined, refined, strengthened. Board members leaned forward, captivated. Richard slammed his fist against the table. "You're insane if you think anyone here would betray me." A voice from the left side of the table. "It's not betrayal, Richard. It's survival." Another voice. "You've been cooking the numbers for months. We all knew something was off." Murmurs swelled. The tide was shifting. Richard turned to me, his face twisted with rage and desperation. You planned this. I cut him off again softly, this time almost kind. "No, Richard. You planned this the moment you dismissed me. You thought you ended my story. But endings," I leaned back, folding my hands, "are often beginnings in disguise." The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. Michael closed his laptop with a quiet snap. "I'll let you all consider the future you want to align with. Richard Hale's empire is crumbling. Evelyn Ross and I are offering you something else: stability, integrity, innovation. The choice is yours." He rose, nodded to me, and left the room. His assistant followed, leaving behind the echo of inevitability. Richard stood, trembling fists, shaking breath shallow. For the first time in 2 decades, I saw fear in his eyes. "This isn't over," he whispered, his voice cracked and low. I leaned forward, my smile faint but razor sharp. "You're right. It's only just begun." As I walked out of the boardroom, past the whispering executives, past the stunned silence, I felt the weight of 20 years lift from my shoulders. The chessboard had flipped, and now every move would be mine. The morning after the boardroom confrontation, my phone buzzed with messages before the sun had fully risen. Some were short, "We need to talk." Others were long, dripping with flattery that hadn't existed the week before. A few simply read, "I'm in." For 20 years, I had been the ghost in the machine, designing, refining, building the gears that made Vortex Dynamics run. Now suddenly, I was the one people were circling around, not Richard Hale. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the bitterness roll across my tongue, grounding myself. It would have been easy to be swept away in the adrenaline of victory. But this wasn't victory. Not yet. This was the middle game. The dangerous part where one wrong move could tip the balance back to him. By mid-morning, the fallout began. Richard stormed into the office like a wounded animal, slamming doors, barking orders. His secretary trailed behind him with wide eyes, juggling folders that he shoved into her arms without looking. I watched from the corridor, invisible once again, though not in the way I had been before. This time, invisibility was strategy. Inside his glass-walled office, he grabbed the phone and barked, "Get me legal." Now then, moments later, "No, not our in-house team. They're compromised. I want external counsel, the best in the city." He was unraveling. By lunchtime, news of the confrontation had leaked. Whispers spread through the company like wildfire, patents stolen, workboard loyalty shifting. I overheard 2 junior analysts in the cafeteria. "Do you think it's true that he stole everything from her?" The other leaned in, lowering his voice. "I heard she's already setting up something with Trantech. If that's real, Hale's done." "Good. About time someone knocked him down." I didn't stop walking, but a quiet satisfaction pulsed through me. 20 years of silence had finally given way to my name passing through lips, not as a rumor, not as a shadow, but as a reckoning. That afternoon, Richard cornered me. He blocked the elevator doors with his arm as I tried to step inside. His jaw was clenched so tightly, the veins in his neck stood out. You think you're clever, don't you? He hissed, parading your little stunt in front of the board. Tran's not your savior. He'll chew you up and spit you out. You're not built for this game, Evelyn. I met his stare, unblinking. Funny. That's what you told me when I pitched my first project. And my second. And my third. But each time you stole them anyway. If I wasn't built for this game, Richard, you wouldn't have needed me for 20 years. His nostrils flared. You'll regret this. No, I said, stepping past him as the elevator chimed. You will? The rest of the week blurred into a storm of meetings, negotiations, and late-night calls with Michael Tran. He was methodical calm, the perfect counterweight to Richard's bluster. We sketched out the framework for our new venture Lean Agile, designed to attract the very people Richard had alienated with his arrogance. Each night as I closed my notebook, exhaustion threatened to swallow me whole. But underneath the fatigue was a pulse of something I hadn't felt in years: purpose. Friday arrived, the day Richard had told me to clear out my desk. I arrived early, boxes neatly stacked, my personal belongings already removed. I left behind nothing but an empty chair, a clean desk, and a single white envelope taped to the monitor. Inside, a copy of the patent filings with my name bold and clear, and a handwritten note. You should have seen me coming. By noon, the board convened without him. Several members had already reached out to me privately, their interest in joining the new venture expressed in cautious but unmistakable terms. Michael spoke first, his voice steady as granite. Gentlemen, you've seen the evidence. Hale's leadership is unsustainable. Vortex Dynamics has two options: continue down with him or rebuild with integrity. One by one, hands shifted, some hesitant, some decisive, but the tide was undeniable. Richard burst into the room midway through, face-red tie, loosened papers clutched in his trembling hands. This is illegal, he shouted. You can't. This is my company. No one answered. The silence was louder than any condemnation. He slammed the papers onto the table, but they fluttered harmlessly, a pathetic storm of rage. You'll regret siding with her. She's nothing without me. I stood slowly, letting the weight of 2 decades rise with me. Then watch closely, I said, my voice low but steady. Because starting Monday, you'll see exactly what I am without you. As I left the boardroom, my heels clicking softly against the polished floor, the hum of whispered voices followed me out. For the first time, I wasn't walking away from 20 years. I was walking toward something new. And Richard Hale, he was walking toward his own collapse. Monday arrived like a storm cloud. Not the kind that rumbles softly on the horizon, but the kind that splits the sky wide open, pouring fire and water in equal measure. The financial press lit up before sunrise. Vortex Dynamics faces patent scandal. Sources internal power shift underway. Industry titan on verge of collapse. I sat in my living room, coffee steaming beside me, scrolling through headline after headline. The photographs made me pause. Richard Hale caught mid-stride outside his office, face twisted with anger. Paparazzi lenses had captured what the board already knew: a man spiraling, stripped of control. The world was finally seeing what I had endured for 20 years. By mid-morning, the phones at Trantech rang nonstop. Journalists, investors, even government regulators, all hungry for answers. Michael looked over at me during our strategy session, eyebrows raised. It's happening faster than expected. We'll need to accelerate our timeline. Can you handle it? I didn't hesitate. I've been waiting 2 decades to handle it. He smiled faintly, tapping his pen against the table. Then, let's give them a Monday they'll never forget. That afternoon, we staged our move. A press release went out at 1:00 p.m. sharp. Trantech and Evelyn Ross announced joint venture Catalyst Innovations. The wording was surgical. We emphasized transparency, integrity, the promise of a new generation of design. Every line cut deeper into Vortex's already bleeding credibility. By 2 hours lunch, my inbox overflowed with resumes. Engineers, project managers, analysts, they weren't just applying. They were fleeing Vortex, attaching digital lifeboats to my name. By 3:00, Richard called me. His voice crackled through the speaker, low and venomous. You think you've won? I let silence stretch for a heartbeat. Richard, this isn't about winning. It's about truth, something you've avoided your entire career. You ungrateful, he choked on the word. Everything you have is because of me. Don't you dare forget that. I leaned back in my chair, eyes on the skyline outside the Trantech windows. No, Richard. Everything you have is because of me. And now, I'm taking it back. The line went dead. By Wednesday, regulators launched a formal inquiry. Patent theft wasn't just an ethical stain, it was a legal one. Richard's lawyers scrambled to bury the trail, but they were playing whack-a-mole against 20 years of documents I had meticulously kept. Every stolen blueprint, every erased email, every silenced credit. They were all there waiting like ghosts, rising from the archives. The breaking point came Friday morning. The board of Vortex Dynamics convened again, this time without ceremony, without pleasantries. The air was thick, heavy with inevitability. Richard entered late, his tie askew. Dark circles bruised beneath his eyes. He slammed a folder onto the table. This is a coup. She's orchestrated this entire charade with Tran. You're all fools if you think she'll save this company. A board member, usually one of his staunchest allies, cleared his throat. Richard, this isn't about Evelyn. It's about your leadership, or rather your failure of it. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Richard's face turned crimson. You can't do this to me. I built Vortex. That was when I stood calm as still water. No, I said quietly but firmly enough for every ear to hear. We built it. You just stole the credit. And now, the world knows. The vote was swift, brutal. Unanimous removal. Richard Hale ousted as CEO of the very empire he had ruled with an iron fist. He staggered back, as though struck his lips, moving soundlessly. For a moment, I thought he might actually collapse. Security escorted him out. The man who had once towered over me, who had reduced my contributions to footnotes and afterthoughts, now looked small, shrunken. As the glass doors closed behind him, the room exhaled. I walked out of that boardroom without looking back. The city skyline stretched before me as I stepped onto the street, the air sharp and electric. For 20 years, I had walked these sidewalks invisible, my ideas locked inside someone else's narrative. Now I wasn't invisible anymore. Catalyst innovations would rise from the ashes of betrayal. Not because I wanted revenge, though that tasted sweeter than I'd admit, but because I wanted something cleaner, freer, built on integrity instead of theft. And I had the people. The resumes kept coming. The calls, the handshakes, the quiet promises. Richard had underestimated the one thing he could never steal: loyalty earned through respect. That night, alone in my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and stood at the window. The city pulsed below, alive with possibility. For the first time in decades, I felt the chains slip away. And in their place, wings. The following Monday, the air in the city felt different. Not just for me, for everyone. Newspapers sold out at corner stands before 8:40 a.m. News anchors repeated my name alongside words like visionary and whistleblower. And across LinkedIn, my inbox swelled with thousands of connection requests, each message a mixture of congratulations and relief. I thought I was the only one he stole from. Thank you for speaking out. You've given the rest of us courage. I should have felt triumphant, but what I felt most was peace. That morning, Catalyst Innovations held its first official team meeting. The conference room at Trantech was packed, every chair taken, latecomers standing along the walls. Former Vortex engineers filled half the room, still carrying the bruises of Richard's regime, but with sparks of hope in their eyes. My people. I took a deep breath and stepped to the front. 20 years ago, I walked into Vortex Dynamics believing in something bigger than myself. I believed in innovation, in teamwork, in shaping the future. And for 20 years, I watched those values be twisted into tools of greed and control. I paused, letting the words settle. Catalyst will be different. Here, no one gets erased, no one gets silenced. Every voice matters, Every contribution counts. If we build this right, we won't just design technology, we'll design trust. The room erupted in applause, the sound echoing off the walls like a thunderclap. That evening, Michael Tran invited me to his office. "You know," he said, leaning back in his chair, "we didn't just gain a company today. We gained a movement. The market's reacting. Investors are circling. Everyone wants to be part of Catalyst." I smiled, but it wasn't the smile of victory. It was something softer, deeper. "I don't want Catalyst to just be profitable," I said. "I want it to be principled. If we succeed without integrity, we're no better than Richard." Michael studied me for a moment, then nodded. "That's exactly why you're the one to lead this." But not every victory comes without scars. One night alone in my apartment, I pulled out an old leather folder. Inside were copies of every design sketch I'd ever made for Vortex, the ones they'd buried, claimed erased. I ran my fingers over the faded ink, each line a memory of long nights' quiet triumphs and stifled pride. For years, those pages felt like proof of my invisibility. Now they felt like proof of survival. I didn't burn them. I didn't throw them away. I placed them carefully back in the folder, then slid it onto my shelf. Not as evidence anymore, but as history. A reminder of where I'd been and how far I'd come. Weeks turned into months. Catalyst grew faster than even Michael predicted. Contracts rolled and partnerships flourished, and with every success I saw the same thing reflected in my team's eyes: freedom. Meanwhile, Richard Hale disappeared from the headlines. Last I heard, he'd sold his penthouse and moved out of state fighting lawsuits he couldn't win. His empire, our empire, crumbled without him. But I didn't gloat. Not anymore. Because revenge wasn't the prize. The prize was this: walking into an office where my name meant something. Where my work stood tall, no longer hidden in someone else's shadow. One Friday evening, I lingered in the Catalyst office long after everyone else left. The city glowed outside, skyscrapers glittering against the dark. I opened the glass doors to the rooftop terrace, breathing in the cool night air. For 20 years, I thought I was trapped in someone else's story. Now I had written my own. And it was only the beginning. To anyone listening to my story now, maybe you've been where I was. Overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. Maybe you've given 20 years or more to a place, a person, a dream that refused to see your worth. I want you to hear this clearly: your story isn't over. Sometimes the ending they give you is just the beginning you didn't know you needed. If my journey has stirred something in you, share it with a friend, a colleague, someone who feels trapped. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, subscribe, because sometimes the battles fought in silence deserve to be spoken out loud. Thank you for walking with me through this. My name is Evelyn Ross. And this finally is my Monday.